Okay, today I am getting to speak to somebody. I met her at the Synthplex. No, we're hearing a lot of Synthplex people right now because I talked to them a couple of months ago and we're getting around to doing the interviews now. Her name is Holly Vernon, and she is sort of one of the head muckety mucks. I don't know what the actual title would be at a thing called the Experimental Sound Society, or XSOSO. I hadn't really heard of this before I went to Synthplex, and then I ran across their display and also got a chance to hear her talk a little bit about it in one of the meetings, one of the presentations, and I was pretty blown away by what the proposal is. So instead of talking about it anymore, we'll just talk to Holly. Hey, Holly, how are you doing?
Hey, Darwin, doing great.
Thank you so much for taking the time to have a chat. I know that you just recently moved, and so there's probably all kinds of hectic in your life. But I really, after seeing what you were doing and what you were trying to pull off, I really wanted to have a chat with you for the podcast. So thanks for taking the time.
Yeah, thank you for asking me to do this. So I'm really excited to get to share more information about this organization with everybody.
Yeah, likewise. So why don't we kick it off by having you describe what it is and what some of your activities look like?
Sure. So Experimental Sound Society is a really new organization. And in a nutshell, it's basically it's a nonprofit organization. And what we do is work to further the efforts of artists. And so there's a back mission in that where I saw this gap really for opportunities for sonic artists to network or find each other in the whole culture of all of it. Experimental Sound Society works basically as an online networking resource. It's sort of like a global collective of sorts, and it's something where whether you're an artist or a curator or an educator, whatever your role is in sonic art, there's some sort of resource that you can pull from the organization to help further whatever it is that you're doing.
That sounds great. I mean, I think it's really interesting that you talk about it as kind of a global collective. I think that in general, people are starting again to warm to the idea of collectives as a means of getting things happening because it's not dependent on someone who is sort of like an authority figure to drive things forward. Instead of it's a group of people helping each other do this stuff. And frankly, I can think of no better group to help one another than experimental sound artists. Now, I will say, I hope that you did your research ahead of time to realize that creating a network opportunity for sound artists is probably not the way that you're going to make $1 billion in an IPO. You recognize that, right?
Yeah. But it was the idea definitely didn't come from a place of oh, we're gonna get rich.
Okay, good for you.
but the whole mission is to help artists further whatever it is that they're doing. So hopefully they can get rich, right?
Well,
so
there you go.
Whatever it is, that we can do to help support in the arts in that regard.
Right.
But at this point, it's the main thing that we see in there, right? So utilizing this global collective is that the way that things are going now, and there's such a separation of just the big corporation and the little guy that we're seeing these opportunities for the little guy to make a tremendous impact by doing something different, and seeing where people that are utilizing networks are cutting through a lot of the clutter just by taking the reins and doing things for themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And that's sort of what I'm hoping people are doing with this organization is seeing that there's opportunities because we have members in over 30 countries around the world that are tapped into this. And so I'm hoping that people see these opportunities to utilize the network in that regard where, if you want to go and tour and how to network with people on the other side of the globe, or if you want to work on some kind of collaboration with people, there's so many ways that you can utilize that web that we're connecting.
Sure. What was your connection to the experimental sound world that caused you to want to make this happen?
Short answer, because I'm a sound artist myself. You know, I'll be the first to say it. Like, I'm not an expert on experimental sound artists. I'm not like a historian
Right.
or like a fact keeper in any regard.
Okay.
It more just comes from a place of love for sound art in general. So I come to it as just like from an artist perspective myself.
Well, I'll tell you though, that's pretty inspiring because again, I I think that all of us who view ourselves as sound artists of whatever type look at the situation and really imagine difficulty even getting other artists in our own town to like support each other. I think it's amazing that you have found a mechanism by which you can get people worldwide to do that. And I think some of that has to come from providing a mechanism that makes it relatively easy. Now, for people who haven't experienced the exoso world or didn't sit in a room and hear you talk about it, which is what I did, why don't
Yeah.
you talk a little bit about exactly what you mean when you're talking about a networking opportunity and a connection mechanism?
Sure. The most simplest way to utilize the organization would be through social media, right? So we have taken on the hashtag EXOSO, short for Experimental Sound Society, you know, the first two letters of each of the words, and asked that people that are sharing their content online use that hashtag and then
Mm-hmm.
follow it as well. And so just from that alone, just it's a very simple concept, but just from that alone, it allows you to find other artists that are creating and sharing content. If you're looking to like, if you just want to get inspired, or maybe you'll find somebody that's posting stuff that works along with whatever idea you have, or someone to collaborate with, or whatever it is. But then following the hashtag, also, the more people are using and posting with that, the more that the organization grows, and the more
Mm-hmm.
the organization grows, the more eyes are on it, and this is like bringing more people attention to help like grow their audience.
Right.
It's all sort of like it works like in a circle, hand in hand. And so that this very simplest version is through the social media hashtag sharing. And
Mm-hmm.
then there's opportunities as well. There's a program that we do called Event Share, where, and this is something that we've worked on a little bit with CAP UCLA and the LA Philharmonic as well, where we just ask, like, it's sort of like a free promotional share. You tell your audience about Experimental Sound Society, and we'll tell our audience about your event.
Mm-hmm.
And that's something that's free that people can use. And then, and it just depending on what it is that you're doing, it's sort of like we'll work on a one-on-one case basis to see like how the organization can help support your situation.
Sure. That sounds really amazing. And again, it seems like a great opportunity, especially as it grows, you know, with any scenario that has the possibility for the networking effect. You know, it would be, I mean, I just imagine for myself if someone was coming into, say, where I live, the Minneapolis area. I mean, it would be fabulous to be able to feel like I was empowered to help them make their show a success, rather than just being a passive observer of the fact that they're coming into town.
Right. Exactly.
You know.
And that's how like we want to be helping. And so like even with your podcast, and we're planning on launching a podcast for Experimental Sound Society later this year, it's something where like with it's sort of in line with the event share. It's something that you would be able to utilize to help promote your podcast. So
Right.
as you post this, we'll share it within our network, and it just like it keeps going from there, where
Sure.
it's just helping to share what it is that you're working on.
Yeah, well, this is really exciting to me because I think it does take advantage of some of what can be otherwise an isolating modern technological environment, and instead turns it into something where we actually can be more present for each other. I think that's really cool. Now, I am curious. One of the things I like doing in my podcast is talking to people about their background and how they got into the work that they're currently doing. From my perspective, you kind of have a dual role here. One is that you're an artist that was compelled to generate this networking environment, but the other side of it is you also are, apparently socially adept enough to be able to manage pulling this together. I'm wondering a little bit about your background. You say that you're a sound artist. I would like to know how you not only got to where you're comfortable talking about yourself in those terms, but also what puts you in a position of feeling like that you can lead the charge on this. I mean, I'm really curious about where you're coming from.
Artistically, I mean, I've always been involved with sound and music in some regard. From playing like traditional instruments as a kid, I started out playing cello, and then tried to learn guitar, and that didn't go so well. But and then moved into electronic music, and just started with like field recordings, and then college years, like what is art?
Right.
Started to get more exploratory in that regard, and found that like this was just that path that I chose to take artistically, was pushing the boundaries of traditional music technique and just being more self-expressive than what like music theory lays out for you. Playing music is a very personal thing, and like when you bleed into it, there's passion.
Hmm.
And so like having that freedom of self-expression without like thinking like, oh, well, I'm making this type of music, so it needs to sound this type of way, was very liberating. As far as like taking the charge on Experimental Sound Society, really like I see the benefits that having a network of people around you does. And not everyone has that luxury. If you're someplace that's not New York or LA or Chicago, London, Tokyo, whatever, like you don't have the luxury of having like a lot of social outings that will provide you with it, like other experimental artists.
Right, right.
And so like giving people the power to tap into that network is just something that I'm hoping that other artists will sort of take it as their own.
Sure.
I get a lot of emails from people that are just like, I want to help. What can I do?
Right.
And the number one, like, this is so cool. I want to be involved. And like, that's amazing. But the number one thing is like, do what you do so that like the organization can help and lift that up. Obviously, like it's growing, and we can absolutely use staff. And if people wanted to volunteer things that are like legal or whatever, like more administrative side of stuff, like,
Hmm.
or even if somebody was interested in like becoming part of the board of directors or something like that, like there's those ways. But the smallest way that like people, that anybody could help, would just be like helping to spread the word about the organization and signing up, which is totally free as well.
Right. Right. Now, when you talk about things like the performance sharing stuff, is there sort of like also a way of helping to generate? So, for example, let's say that I am Darwin Gross, the random sound artist, and I decide
Mhm.
I would like to do something, do a set of gigs in Florida, right? Well, I kind of
Sure.
don't know anybody in Florida. Do you have some mechanism where I could say, hey, I'm looking for people in Florida, maybe Jacksonville, maybe Miami, where I could try and find people? Is there that kind of mechanism in it? Because I know you're collecting
Yeah.
location and names and stuff like that. How much do you allow people to use that as a mechanism for reaching out and contacting people?
Obviously, like I'm not going to be like, here's everybody's email address that's in Florida. Like,
Right, right.
you're going to get like weird emails from random people, but rather, and that would be
That would
so
be
goofy.
awesome. That would
Side
be
note.
maybe right. Maybe that's your
Thanks
way to
for
make a
signing
million
up.
dollars, right? Experimental
Oh
sound
no.
spammers.
Yeah, no. No, the way that, somebody could utilize it in that regard is just pretty simple. Like, give me something that's shareable,
Mm-hmm.
right? So it's basically like you are creating like a call to collaborators for
Right.
something like that. So
Right.
if you want to go and tour Florida, give me a photo and link to your information and a blurb, and then I can share that through the Experimental Sound Society
Got
social
it.
media or through like an email newsletter to people that are just in the Florida area and say like, Darwin's looking to tour in Florida. Here's a link to his music. If you're involved or interested, like, please hit him up on whatever link you provide.
Sure. That's cool. Because I was wondering, in a way, you're developing a database, but I think we're all a little bit nervous about sort of the privacy aspect of like
Right.
being a little too share heavy. So this is good. So you, in a way, you kind of act like fairly
Like a connector.
light-handed, yeah, or yeah, I was going to say gatekeeper, but a connector is actually a better way of thinking about it.
Like Experimental Sound Society Darwin is like your friend that's going to introduce you to their friend.
Well, nice, because I'm not very good at
Like,
introducing myself, so I
hey,
like
I
that.
know a guy.
Yeah, right. That's great. Now, one of the things I'm curious about, given your background, uh, the name of the thing is Experimental Sound Society, not Music Society. And I'm
Sure.
wondering, what is it? You talked very briefly about sort of like the liberation of electronics and of sound from sort of the shackles of music, but I I'm wondering to what extent what does that range mean to you? What does experimental sound mean to you? Does is it squeaky classical stuff? Is it techno? Is it field recordings? Is it cinematic sound, right? There's many different things
Sure.
that sort of like bounce around in experiment. To what extent do you even care what people think of it? And how much do you feel like you need to be also an arbiter of that? Because maybe like, somebody with two distortion pedals on their guitar is going to think of themselves as an experimental sound artist, where everyone else would say, "Hey, that's a heavy metal band," right? Do you
Right.
uh do you even get involved in that conversation, and to what extent do you care?
I mean, there's the extent that I care and the extent that the organization will
Right.
care,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, right.
So,
I guess I'd like to know a
um,
little bit about both, maybe. Right.
and it's sort of a fun conversation too. Like I was having this talk with a friend of mine the other day, where it's like, well, what's sound and what is music and what's the
Right.
difference and what,
Right.
like, and if you hear music that is terrible and it's irritating you, then it becomes a noise, and then does that make it just a sound and it's no longer music? It's
Right.
like mind blown,
Right.
right? And so like you can go on back and forth about it forever. And so like the way that I explain the separation for me personally, right? Because I think it's up to the artist to decide what
Hmm.
they are.
Hmm.
Like I can't make that definition for them. But for me, the music comes from the root of sound, right? So like sound is the root of where music comes from.
Hmm.
And like anything that you're taking in through your ears is some kind of sound. So the listener decides if it's music, the artist decides if it's music. Like it can go back and forth. And so like I don't personally take the place of judgment on that for the artists that are involved in the organization within the Experimental Sound Society. Like if you are an experimental sound artist that is making music,
Hmm.
great. It fits. Or if you are an experimental musician that is recording sounds, then like are those sounds experimental? You decide.
Right. Right. It's really it's interesting because so often people tend to think of there being something specific that makes, and it especially gets dicey when you talk about people like noise music, right?
Right.
Whether it's Meersbau or whomever, right? There's almost a conflict in the discussion about whether something is sound, is it noise, is it music, is it just art, and we can't even express it in terms of sonic value of any sort.
Absolutely. Like the statement in itself is contradictory.
It really is. It really is, and it's
So
interesting area to explore.
absolutely. So we say like the way that experimental music is defined, right, is that it's music that's defying genre definitions.
Right.
And so if you're making noise music, then is that a genre? And now it's no longer experimental.
Right. Right. Whoops. Yeah, that's actually, well, it's a puzzle. It's very interesting. You until recently you were in LA, which is sort of one of the hubs of not only connections to other people, but also sort of acceptance of all kinds of music and all kinds of expressions of music and sound and uses of sound and all this kind of stuff. But I'm curious, what is it maybe in that environment that also led you into the bigger picture of making connections and drawing people together? Because it sounds, I mean, you actually talked a little bit earlier about how being in some of these bigger locations allow you to make these connections, but obviously something wasn't quite exactly clicking for you that it made you want it to go farther.
I actually began working on it when I was living in Florida.
Oh, really?
And
Oh,
then, yeah, so I was living in Florida and came up with the idea because at the time I was traveling a lot, but I was based in Florida. And every time I would hop on a plane, for days before, I was doing research like, oh, I'm going to this town. And so what's happening there and who are the artists there? And it was getting to the point where I was literally calling the local like college radio stations and saying like, asking them, where's the clubs that are like putting
right.
on the experimental shows, or what's
Sure.
more interesting that's happening in your town, and like just searching through all ends of the internet to do research to try and find this information. So that's where the idea spawned, and then I ended up going out to LA, and 10 months later realizing I don't need to be in LA to do this. It's just like the exact point is that you don't need to be in LA to be doing what you're doing.
Oh, that's
So
brilliant. That's brilliant because in a way, I'll tell you something, Holly. I ran into something long ago at sort of the introduction of the internet into electronic music life. I was living in Milwaukee, right, which is in musical industry and musical connection world is literally the middle of nowhere. And it was kind of depressing because I didn't really know anybody in town. I just happened to be living there for work and felt like I didn't really have a connection to the world. And all of a sudden, the internet comes along and there's mailing lists and stuff like this and these interests. And next thing you know, I'm finding people locally that are doing stuff, but I'm also making connections to people all over the place because of this. The internet kind of changed the world. But what you pointed out is something where the internet hasn't actually helped a ton, which is how do I find out, sort of from a cultural standpoint, what what's available? Because in some ways, the mechanisms we normally get at to connect to places we don't know really preference like some sort of external cultural value, right? So if I'm going to
sure.
go to, I don't know, Lincoln, Nebraska, right? And I actually did a show where I was in Lincoln. I ran across this cool set of people, but I'll tell you, it was a complete accident that I ran into them. Because generally speaking, if I went and I looked online, I would get stuff related to university, stuff related to the biggest museum in town, maybe the biggest venues in town. But I didn't
Yeah, but
have
that's
it.
not where you're going to
That's
want to
not
hang out.
that's not where the people that I love hanging out with are found. That's exactly right. And so I think it's amazing that what you're doing opens the door for some of that.
Right? Because so many of those things, those like counterculture or alternative events that are happening, are one-offs, right? So
Right.
how is that person who's just like, I've managed to put together this group of people for this one-off event, going to tap into a large audience to tell people that it's happening?
Sure.
Because there
Right.
could be somebody that's like living in a town 2 hours away that would definitely want to be involved in something like that
Absolutely.
and
Right.
just doesn't have the connection because
Yeah.
they don't know it exists.
Right. Right. Because Well, and because sometimes even getting to know who's in your area is kind of an insular thing. And if you didn't happen to be around the right group of people, you didn't know what was going on.
Or you're not gregarious enough
Or
to
you're
go
not
and meet
gregarious
some
enough to
new
do it,
friends.
right? Yeah, exactly. Um, have you experienced any like success stories from doing these kind of shares? What are some examples of connections that you've helped make?
Some of the ones that I really like are like the people that are putting on like workshops in random parts of the world and connecting them with like other people that are doing something similar, like that can maybe help lead the way. There's examples of like people that were doing workshops where they're doing like circuit bending and looking for advice on like how to put it together or like how to even like promote it or where to begin, like building up their audience for it.
Hmm.
Because when they had started it, it was just like a group of friends and they wanted to like share it out to their community.
All right.
And so we were able to put them in touch with people that were also members of the organization that were literally on the other side of the world doing the exact same thing, but had already built it up to a level where they were involved with their local community. And I think they were doing it at like a school or something like that on weekends or whatever it was. But making the connections like that are some of the favorite ones that I have, where it's people that are just in these random parts of the world and I'm able to help link them up to someone like literally across the globe to help further to make sure that their events are coming off and they have somebody that like has the experience that can help lead them in the way, and then they're making that connection. So like hopefully in the future they work together on something else.
Right. Now, do you only interact with individuals or do you get information from other organizations or venues and stuff like that as well?
With other organizations and venues all the time. So we're also working with educators where, like, if they wanted to do stuff with their students and get Experimental Sound Society involved, sort of like as a motivator,
Hmm.
we like will sponsor prize packages if they wanted to like set up competitions for their students to do something that was sound related.
That's interesting. That's really cool.
So it's really up to like whatever it is that people are involved within sonic arts. I always tell people like just pitch the idea and let's see how we can get involved in it to help grow it into something more.
So earlier you talked about the sort of the easiest way to get in is to just start using or searching on the hashtag XOSO. That's EXSOSO for all of those of you who are listening and not like reading my words or something. Um, the question I would have is on your site you also have a way to like sign up. What is the mechanism?
Right.
How does that? I mean, if I just sign up and I send it, which I just actually did, so now I'm curious. Like, so I just signed up and I shipped this off to you. What happens now? Does this like go in your database and you've already said that you're not going to spam me, so that's a good, that's a good first
It
sign.
basically just sits there until some creep in Florida wants
Yeah,
to
there you
know
go.
like
Wants to know.
how they
Right.
can get in touch with
How
podcasters,
good-
and then I'll send them
podcasters
your
in
phone
Minnesota. Right, that's great.
number.
All right. Well, that's going to work out for me, I can see already. Um, but sort of like what's the mechanism behind this? And how much activity are you actually asking for? I mean, do you really want me to? I mean, so for example, how open are you to saying something like, "Hey, I'm a podcaster. Do you have somebody that you would think would be interesting to for me to interview?" Do you are you open to saying, "Hey, I want to go tour in Florida. Can you hook me up with people?" Or I'm about to do a workshop. Can you? I mean, what are the different mechanisms that are available, and does all of it require sort of like an email to you?
Well, you would email into the organization, yeah, and it would get sorted through to see how we could work together.
Got it.
So, as a podcaster, if you were looking for people to interview, then absolutely, I want to hear from you.
Hmm.
And it's not something where like I would, here's the database,
Oh no,
like
I
pick
get
through.
that. Right.
But I would instead ask you to submit something to me that's shareable that
Right.
I can send out to invite people to, like, if you're interested in this, submit something to you, and then you would be able to sort through it.
See, that's I guess what I was looking for. The mechanism is one. It's not where you're going to go out and find the people for me to interview, but rather you're going to be the conduit then for my request to kind of
Exactly.
go out to the community. Great.
Exactly.
About how many people are involved in the organization right now? Like
Well,
how
there's
many are in your
thousands,
database? Right.
thousands. I don't know the exact count, but it's like in the thousands.
That's wild. You said like 30 countries, huh?
Yep. Last count, I think was 32 countries.
Unreal. Where's that? I'm just because I'm curious. What country has the highest representation? Is it the U.S.?
U.S.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely the U.S. And then there's a pretty large number of people in the U.K. as well.
Hmm.
But between Europe and the U.S. is like the larger number of concentrated members.
Sure. What are the mechanisms by which you're trying to spread the word, other than being on fabulous podcasts like my own?
Well, through using the organization, right? So within the organization, we ask, like, you tell your friends about us so we can tell everybody and all of our friends and members about you,
Uh-huh.
right? So it's basically like we are using our social media and asking people to share information about us, right? And then in return, you can tap into our network to share the information about what you're doing. So the organization works to promote itself the same way that we want to promote the people that are involved.
Interesting. Right. And so the way I help personally then is to just focus on using the hashtag and being part of the organization, responding when I'm called to. Is that how you think of the typical person being involved?
Absolutely. Yeah, I don't see it as something where like, oh, I need to show up to my Thursday so meeting, you know, make sure and
Wearing
don't
my
miss that,
special
you know.
Excelso cap, which I noticed that you do
You know,
sell. So,
use it as much or as little as you'd like. It's
right.
something that's there if you need it or if you want it. The level of involvement is really left up to the user.
Okay. But now, when I air this, the thing I would like to say, and I'll say it right now, is, hey, I would like all my listeners to get involved. So I got like, say, roughly 10,000 people that are going to listen to this, right? What do I have them do? Do I say go to exoso.com
Um,
and sign up? Is that what you want? Is it spend some time searching the
Absolutely.
hashtag? Is it buy a hat? What? How do we help?
Three very simple things, right? So, three very, very simple things of you can help and be involved. Number one, sign up, right? So you go to the website, fill in that short form that basically asks, like, who are you? Where are you? What are you doing?
Hmm.
Like, and then link up with us on social media. We're on Facebook and Instagram, and use that hashtag Exoso to share your content and also like follow it so you can check out other people's content.
Right.
And the third way to really help is obviously donate. So
There you go.
we don't ask the artists or curators or educators or anybody to pay for the services that we're offering,
Okay.
but we do ask for donations from the public. And so if you wanted, you could just donate money from the donate button on the website, or you can buy stuff in the store. That all goes to support the organization as well.
Well, that's fabulous. I'm on it, and I hope that my listeners are on it too. So before we wrap up, I'm just wondering, is there anything else that you'd like to share about what's going on?
Yeah, a couple exciting things. I mean, we are going to be launching the podcast later this year, and also starting to do our own artist compilations, which is a very exciting bit of news that I haven't shared out with anyone yet before. So that's brand new. So look out for the artist call on that one, because that's going to be pretty fun. But really, I'm just hoping that everybody gets involved, because it's a really great way to like grow whatever it is that you're doing. Say, like, let's grow together.
Hmm. And then finally, as an artist yourself, where would I where would I go to find out more about your work? Because
Oh,
I mean, if
my
nothing
God.
else, this is like the opportunity for you to shine. But also, I mean, it is kind of cool to know that this is an organization that was started by an artist into it, right? Do you have something that we could share?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I am not terribly active on social media for myself personally,
Okay.
but I do participate on the Instagram. So
Okay.
and I go by the username The Wrong Holly, and you can see some clips and stuff from some of my more recent performances where I have taken the dive into modular. Oh
Ah,
dear.
all right. Well, we're never going to see you again then, believe me.
So,
That's the
so yeah, so
that
I'm
is the
around.
dark, dark hole of modular. Well, that's fantastic. Well, with that, we are going to wrap it up. I'll let you have the rest of your day. I want to thank you so much for taking the time to have this discussion. And again, for people that are into it, it's exsoso.com, correct?
Yes.
All right, and at the Synthplex, you had like really cool pins, one of which is now permanently attached to my backpack. Um,
Nice.
yeah, there you go.
I
Yeah,
love that.
I'm going to be out front and center with your logo. I just want to say for people who haven't checked out the site yet, go check it out. If nothing else, a lot of the graphic design and stuff is really attractive, and I think that that's helpful in getting people to kind of take this kind of thing not only seriously but kind of to start loving it as well. So I appreciate that, and I appreciate all the things that you're doing to make this a real thing.
Thank you.
All right.
Thanks. Darwin, I did just real quick, if people are interested in that really cool pin, we don't sell it on the website.
I know, so I might have to
You'd
take
have
that
to
out. So
come
maybe
to
I'll.
one of the Experimental Sound Society events or get involved in the organization if you wanted to get one of those.
Well, there
But
you
there is
go.
like
That's
a bunch
awesome.
of other super cool merch on the website.
Okay, all right. Well, now there you go. Now I've actually let the cat out of the bag, which is that people have to see you in order to get the really cool pin. So we'll make sure
You got
that
to come
that's
out.
a yeah, right. That's that adds a little juice to it. Okay. Well, I want to thank you again and have a great day.
All right, Darwin, thank you so much.
All right, bye. Many thanks to Holly for the chat. It was really interesting to hear about how this group got started and where it's headed. If you are interested, as I mentioned many times in the interview, go to xsoso, that's exsoso.com. You can learn more about the Experimental Sound Society. I want to thank you, the listeners, for showing up every single week like you do. I do appreciate it. This being Mother's Day, a special warm thanks to all the mothers out there and all the people who provide motherly support. With that, I wish you a great weekend, a great week, and I will catch you next time around. Bye.